Go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining us this morning and for the webinar today. I think you'll find that it provides some good guidance and direction around governance and security best practices for your teams and in 365 environment. Today you're going to hear from myself, Joe Brown. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer here, and also from David Simsik, our lead cloud architect. Again, my name is Joe Brown. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer. I've been in this cloud and SaaS space for a long time, and most recently, prior to joining Xgility, I was a worldwide cloud strategist for a global value-added reseller. I'm most proud of the work I'm doing here at Xgility, and happy to bring you some really great content today. And next, David, please introduce yourself.
Yes, hi, good morning, everybody. Super excited to be here to be able to present to you today. My name is David Simsik, and I'm the lead cloud architect here at Xgility. I've been a cloud evangelist for a few years, and with over 20 years in the IT industry, both as an architect and IT administrator, kind of on the customer side, as well as a consultant. I've built a number of cloud practices over the years and focused really on, Microsoft Cloud, supporting some federal and commercial customers. And my expertise is around, as I mentioned, Microsoft as well as compliance.
Great, thank you, David. We are also joined in the background by our wonderful marketing manager, Diane Tira, who is orchestrating some of this for us in the background, and she'll be helping us out with some of the aspects of the presentation. Today we're going to have Q&A at the end of the presentation, but feel free, and I would encourage you to put your questions and answers in the chat as we go through, as they come up in your head. We are also going to be having 3 different polls throughout the presentation today that will, give us some insight into how you're handling some of this new norm that we're in today, this remote work world we live in. And it will also help us to, tailor some of the information we're going to be sharing with you going forward. We'll show you the results of the polls in real time as we execute those. So I think it'll be valuable to you as well to see those results. So please participate. We'd love to have your input. So let's get started this morning with the first poll. Diane, could you launch that for us, please?
That. So our first question is, during the pandemic, did your organization roll out teams to support your remote workers? So please select one, yes, yes, but you also used other collaboration or meeting calling tools. You already deployed it prior to the pandemic, or you haven't deployed it yet. So give a few seconds here for everyone to respond.
Great, it looks like we're getting some good results in already.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. It looks like everyone's responded. It looks like most of you had already deployed it, or about half of everyone has already deployed it prior to the pandemic. Another large section deployed it, but we're also using other tools. A portion of you launched it just at the pandemic, and another portion hasn't launched it yet. So that's good to know. I think regardless of where you are in teams, this webinar is going to provide some really useful strategies to help get started around the governance aspect.
Fantastic, thanks, Diane. Appreciate that. Looks like we have people from all different areas and all different levels of adoption of teams, and so as Diane said, this will be relevant to you no matter what. Let's see here. So let's talk about remote work, because that's where we all are these days, working in a new world. COVID-19 has really transformed the way we had to work overnight. It sort of forced us from this very office-centric culture into a much more remote and distanced workforce, which creates some significant challenges around security and governance. Overnight, some of our biggest governance worries became our employees, our very trusted employees, by the way. They've unknowingly become some of the biggest threats we have with regards to compliance and security. And it's not because they are trying to do things bad. It's just they have been thrust into this wonderful new world of remote work, and they're trying to get their jobs done. And we'll talk a lot about that as we go forward. Evidence to this has been that Microsoft Teams used to have 75 million daily active users and has spiked up to 200 million active users on a daily basis, which is, as you can imagine, a significant change in the way that Microsoft had to build infrastructure out to support that, but the culture of these organizations are representative in that number going to remote work style. The pandemic, as you guys all know, have forced IT executives and directors and everyone really to rethink the way they handle security and compliance. The cyber strategy has changed, and where they're investing money has changed dramatically. I know that a lot of organizations used to use still desktop computers, towers at the office, and had to change to implementing laptops for their remote employees to improve their security posture. And so that's one example of how priorities from investment perspective changed. So earlier I mentioned that your employees have become unknowingly become one of your biggest threats. And this is some evidence and statistic to support that, that were from a recent poll. And as you can see here, that there's been a 123% increase in the use of USB drives, which we all, I think, thought were extinct, but have made a resurgence, which means your data now is going onto unsecure portable drives that are being used probably most of the time for good purposes, but can be lost. Stuff like classified data, is being marked now, but is being moved around, kind of off network a lot. Third-party file storage, cloud file storage systems, the increase has gone up by 72%. Probably a lot of that is shadow IT, which is the bad part of all of it. 49% increase in email attachments, which instead of walking a document from one person to another or putting it on a file share and retrieving it, they've been passed around by email, which causes all kinds of different issues. And then printing documents at home, can also be a bit of a challenge. If you print sensitive data on a document, leave it on the printer, it could end up in your kids' homework packet. They turn into their teacher inadvertently. I know my kids are virtual learning these days, and probably most of yours are too. And it creates a situation where your home environment maybe not as secure as it used to be from that type of perspective. And then also, you have network attached storage. A lot of people do that they've been putting their family photos on and otherwise keeping personal stuff on, but now your office documents are ending up on that NAS storage. And so dealing with all these issues creates a significant challenge for compliance and security. Let's quickly talk about the differences between governance and security, because oftentimes they're mistaken. One is mistaken for the other. And so I like to always kind of start with the NIST definition of governance. And really, if you think about this and you just boil it down, it's really a set of processes or framework that is used to support and align your security strategies and tactics with your business objectives and the applicable government and industry regulations, as well as internal controls and policies that you have, align all those together. We like to refer to it as a set of guardrails. Governance to us is a set of guardrails. it helps to keep you between the lines to a certain degree, right? And so, why is it important? Why is it difficult? Is the reason why it's important, right? It's a little bit difficult because it's hard to figure out where to start. You tend to, try to pick off governance on an application by application basis, and it's not always the best approach. Also, there's a bit of confusion between what is governance and what is security. When you think about, specifically the Teams and Microsoft 365, where governance fits in, it's difficult to figure out all the aspects of where to apply governance and where not to. You can oftentimes lock down stuff too much, and it can cause some challenges for your end users. And then, thinking about how to apply governance with using Microsoft 365 groups can also be a bit challenging because it's not totally clear unless you talk with somebody who's an expert about how to do that. Remote employees, historically kind of have been overlooked in many cases because they haven't been the vast majority of your workforce, but now they are. And a lot of you, roughly, 50% of the people we polled, actually more like 75% of the people we polled here, have rolled out Teams for one reason or another. And a vast majority of those folks have rolled it out right as the pandemic hit in order to deal with remote workforce collaboration. And so I suspect a lot of you hadn't had the chance to push pause and think about or rethink your governance and security plans. Security and data protection, obviously, these are it's a critical aspect of what you're trying to put in place. Having a solid and comprehensive identity and access management plan is the cornerstone of it, and David will get into what that means and how to make it work. If you're using Teams, which most of you are, how does this all fit together with your access management, your data governance, and all those parts of your 365 tenant? And how do I protect the data at its core? What's the best way to do that so I can achieve the compliance posture I need to fit my organization's industry requirements? And then if you think about what governance can mean to your organization or lack thereof, it can create end user confusion and frustration. Governance is not just a set of policies. When you think about governance, you should very much think about adoption and user training, end user training, because a properly developed and executed governance plan has a lot of awareness and communication associated with it, so that your users understand how to use the governance policies that you put in place. It's not just something that you write up a really thick volume of documents and put them up on the shelf and let them collect dust. It's a living document. It's a living set of policies and guidelines that you need to train your user community on so that they are more well informed and it's easier for them to adhere to it. Certainly, lack of governance can create data loss, shadow IT, result in security breaches, and a lot of it being unknowingly resulting in security breaches. Overall, lack of governance is easy to create, chaos for the IT organization and for folks who are trying to administer the Teams environment. If you just light up Teams and throw it out to the wild and let people, start creating stuff, you'll very quickly understand that there's, a mushroom effect of the chaos that's created. And so understanding how to control that and manage it is critical. As earlier I said, we think of governance as a set of guardrails. If you think about governance being the guardrails, and you think about, the policies and the security technologies that you're going to implement and techniques as being like the signs and the dotted lines in the road and the, all the different aspects of driving, they're all super critical. If you think about your end users, being a 16-year-old teenager who just who who you just gave the keys to the car to, you wouldn't put them on that road without training them on how to drive that car or teaching them what the signs meant on the road. You would very much make them, and the government does this for us, thankfully, make sure that they have the capabilities to get their license and understand how to drive on the road, and they practice and all those things before they got on the road so that they didn't endanger themselves and others. And you have to think about governance and security as being very similar to that analogy. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dave Simsik. I think we have another poll here. And Dave, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate great introduction to governance and security for collaboration, especially as you're using cloud tools. And I really do love that highway example that you gave of explaining what the guardrails are. So yes, we do have a poll. So Diane, if you would like to take it away.
Sure. So next poll, on a scale, of 1 to 5, how confident do you feel about your organization's team's governance and security plans? Go ahead and select one of them. Number 1, confident. Number 1, very confident. 2, confident. 3, somewhat confident. 4, not confident. Or 5, unsure. You don't have any plans yet. So I'll give a few more seconds here for everyone to respond. Okay, gonna go ahead and close now. So it looks like we're somewhat confident is the winner. We have a range of responses. So I think regardless of how confident you feel, you're definitely going to get some good key takeaways today about how to strengthen your governance and security plans, or if you haven't started, some good tips on your starting points. I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you, David.
All right, thank you so much. Some great information. So, all right, so, Joe had talked about kind of the confusion around governance, and really that starts with, what we've seen with some customers, the confusion around how Teams applies within Office 365 and this transition of collaboration to Microsoft Teams. And really that's based on how Microsoft has developed Teams as the hub for, they call it teamwork, but really collaboration. And that really ties back to a lot of the other capabilities or tools within Microsoft 365. So enabling Teams for collaboration is very simple, right? It's a matter of assigning licenses, and your users have access to Microsoft Teams and can start collaborating. But implementing governance around it of how they can use, how they should use, is where the challenge comes in, and it confuses many organizations. And what that really means is, what I'm referring to is that when you deploy a new team, there are many tools in the background that also are provisioned. So for example, as you can see on the slide, SharePoint sites and document libraries. Within Exchange Online, you get some shared mailboxes, team calendars, as well as a default OneNote. And then of course, as you leverage Teams more, there are certainly many other tools, Planner, Power BI, potentially other storage solutions and other cloud solutions that you may integrate into Teams as well. And so how do you apply governance across all of that? And really what I'd like to suggest for your consideration is, as you look at remote collaborations through Teams, it's also an opportunity to either go back and look at your overall governance within Microsoft 365, or certainly consider some of the governance requirements across, again, all of the tools. And so, Teams adoption and really governance is a journey. It's not a destination, right? So you as an organization have made the investment to utilize Microsoft 365 and roll out or have an interest in rolled out. And actually, as the poll showed, most of you have rolled out Microsoft Teams to at least some extent. And so really it's within the, should be your organizational goal to get a good return on investment. And so therefore, you should be looking to achieve organization-wide adoption. Adoption is a critical aspect of your success, and therefore governance is a must, because governance is really about setting up so that people can be their most productive selves, right? So that they can get their job done. And so really, I believe that there's an opportunity for IT and IT security to kind of redefine the discussion around governance and security with their users, that governance is not there to stop them from doing their work, but rather to offer those guardrails that Joe was talking about, and as a result, enable them to get their job done. So with that in mind, it's critical that you look at governance. And again, as the poll showed, most of you have already started or have enabled and are starting to use Microsoft Teams to at least some level. But we really stress to our customers that you look at governance as a way to align your IT strategy with your business requirements and strategies. And you should be trying to implement some level of governance before going into full production, or at least as soon as possible. And part of the reason for that is something that we as human beings experience called loss aversion. And so the idea is, if you roll out Teams and enable users to start using all the different features, as you then go to implement governance and ultimately security and lock down some of those features, you can actually, create some aversion, I guess, within your users, which can lead back to shadow IT, or potentially, just loss of user adoption, which, as I said, is critical for your success. So there are some decision points that we believe you should make in addressing governance. So first of all, who can create groups, who can create teams? External collaboration, right? How do you share information externally to your organizations? And the types of data and the types of information that you're enabling your users to collaborate within teams. And compliance is critical to governance. So looking at your compliance requirements that you have to adhere to, or that you want to adhere to, and what sort of governance you should build around protecting that data and protecting the users. So when you're looking at governance, one of the kind of critical places to start is around identity and identity lifecycle. This is really where you're able to balance your remote access and collaboration needs with the security and compliance. We usually stress to our customers that when it comes to any sort of cloud adoption, and again, this certainly applies to 365 and Microsoft Teams, identity is the primary security parameter, and really, again, as I mentioned, should be addressed first. So start with identity lifecycle, and this has to do with how users are enabled to be created in the environment. There's some questions that you should ask, such as, how quickly can a person have access to resources that they need, and how should that access change over time, right? As they are onboarded into the environment, they may go through multiple jobs and roles within your organization, and ultimately potentially retire or leave the organization. And so Microsoft has done a great job of building in some tools within 365 and within Teams to integrate your identity back to an HR management application that you may already be using. Some of these are default integrations, others can be built through the use of tools such as Power Apps. And so identity, obviously, within Microsoft 365 is all based on Azure Active Directory. And kind of the next decision factor around life cycle and governance as it relates to identity is, again, how you manage the access that users have. So accessing the teams that they need to be part of to collaborate, as well as accessing data and information that they need to be, modifying and potentially ultimately, publishing or sharing. And so once again, Microsoft has built in some great tools utilizing conditional access policies, as well as dynamic groups that actually enable the organization to provide access automatically to either departmental or organizational teams based on who an individual reports to, so their manager or their position. And then finally, an important factor of identity governance has to do with privileged access management and lifecycle. And so, of course, that relates to your IT administrators. And once again, there are some tools built into Azure Active Directory and built into 365 and Teams around managing how your administrators are able to both collaborate, right, and perform their duties in terms of working with the rest of the organization, but also get access to the governance and security settings built into the different administrator portals. So once you've addressed, identity, and obviously you're working on building your governance, the next step is, how do you apply that governance? And again, as we talked about, both Joe and I earlier, this is where a lot of confusion comes in, because traditionally within Microsoft 365, you would apply that governance more at the application tier. But as with Microsoft Teams rolling out, they introduced groups. So Microsoft 365 groups used to be called Office 365 groups. As Microsoft made the change in their naming, they updated that. So applying governance across overlapping application can obviously be a challenge, because you could have certain governance and, of course, security settings that could conflict with each other. So what that ultimately means for the end user is that their user experience as they go into Teams and perhaps access some information within SharePoint and then go to use a shared mailbox would change, and which can obviously lead to some frustrations. So that's the underpinnings of 365 groups, and it's really a common layer across tools that functions as a membership service for users. And so by utilizing 365 groups to apply your governance, you enable your users to gain access to information and collaboration across the different tools to get access to the information they need. And really the benefit to the IT organization is it reduces the customization required to implement governance. And so as we've built out and supported customers in working with and implementing governance, there are really 4 pillars to a successful data governance plan. Data governance is critical. We talked about identity, we talked about access, we talked about some of the other components. Data is kind of what's really important as you move to cloud-based solution and remote access solutions, right? You no longer have to manage underlying servers that most of us spent our time securing in our traditional data center. And so data governance has really been a challenging historically, because it used to be a bolt-on solution, generally, once again, at the application level, right? So a lot of us would deploy data governance tools on Exchange. Maybe we had some permissions and logging and reporting on file servers and other tools. And it was not really a cohesive strategy, because there is not one tool that you could put into your data center that was really able to do data governance across all of your applications and IT system. But that changed with Office 365 because Microsoft built in a lot of these capabilities up front. So as you're building out and as you're documenting your data governance policies and procedures, start by focusing on empowering employees. And this really comes back to the identity lifecycle and some of the different components that we already talked about. But the goal should be to enable as much self-service creation capability as possible while still meeting your compliance. And so use some of the lifecycle management tools that Microsoft gives. Next, you want to look at and identify valuable content. So what is the data and information that you as an organization must protect? And so this is where classification of data becomes really critical. There's actually a benefit here because all of these tools are, these capabilities that Microsoft provide are not an afterthought. Again, they're not bolt-on. You can use individual tools like Microsoft Teams and then the underlying solutions, and you don't have to use different DLP policies, as an example, to identify valuable data. You can define your classification capabilities and have that work across Office 365. And there's been actually some new announcement from Microsoft even as late as yesterday during Microsoft Ignite. And so next, once you've identified your data, what are you protecting, right? You need to protect access. And so this is where conditional access policies come into play, as well as using some information rights management. And this is where you can enforce some of the policies, some of the classification and security requirements that ultimately you will want to and need to apply. And so this is the stage of governance where you determine, okay, what sort of classification do I need to apply to certain types of information, and how am I going to protect that? Can that information leave the organization? Does it need to be encrypted? So questions along those lines. And finally, accountability is a critical aspect of any governance and certainly security strategy. So Microsoft and Microsoft Teams offer a lot of capability around this, including the ability to set policies around how to manage groups, how to manage site ownerships, review regular membership access logs, and then run reports. So a lot of these capabilities are built in out of the box, and you just have to create a strategy for regularly reviewing them and what's the process for handling certain types of incidents. And so as you go to create a team's governance plan, there are, again, as I mentioned, a lot of different questions that often confuse organizations. And so what we've done is boil those down to 6 core decision points as you get rolling with Microsoft Teams. So first, you start with who can create a team. As I mentioned, when you create a team, there's a lot of back-end provisioning that Microsoft does across all of the tools. And so we generally recommend 2 ways of doing this, certainly as you go into a pilot, but also get started with a team. By default, Microsoft allows anyone within your organization enabled for Microsoft Teams to create their own team. We recommend that you look at your current governance or how you currently function, and either continue with the default configuration or use IT with some Teams champions that you identify within your organization as a starting place for being able to create teams. So next, there are some other decision points that you should look at, such as naming conventions and requirements that you may already be using, as well as meeting capabilities, again, within Teams and within the other components of the Office 365 collaboration suite. This could include, who can schedule meetings, who can add or modify data or even delete data from a team, and are there any expiration policies that you would like to use? And then finally, kind of the last 3 questions that we recommend you look at, or decision points, really around guest access. Does your organization collaborate with a lot of partner organizations? And how you provide access currently, how does that map to Microsoft Teams and Office 365? What are going to be your default approved apps, not just within the Office 365 suite or Microsoft 365 suite, but also potentially other cloud and SaaS solutions that you will want to integrate as you get rolling with Teams. And then finally, and we already talked briefly about this, data security. Again, it's critical critical for compliance. So you should definitely think about how you're going to implement data classifications and related policies, and what are your requirements for protecting. And so at the end of the day, what we usually tell customers is there's two primary ways to really get started with some of these decision points, focused on who can create teams versus guest access into the environment. So inviting external users in to collaborate with you and have access to data. And so the one of the routes that we recommend is enable guest access, but limit team creation. And so this is what I mentioned, utilizing IT and some team champions within the organization would be trained to then be the individuals who would create teams, and they would understand and be trained to ensure that the teams they set up are compliant and meet the governance process that the organization is creating. The other option is to enable anyone within the pilot or within the organization, if you're rolled out, to create teams, but potentially limit guest access initially, so that it just gives you a little bit more time to look at approved applications as well as that critical data security component. And so, once you've made all your decision, you need to create a governance plan. And, we just wanted to review really quick what should really be included in your team's governance plan. And so again, apply your governance first to 365 groups, and then if you have further governance need, then look at team-specific governance. Then make sure you address and have a section around identity and access governance and lifecycle. As I mentioned, this is super critical to protecting the organization and being compliant, as well as looking at data and information protection requirements and creating governance around that. And of course, do not forget about monitoring and reporting. Look at how you're doing that today. There are certainly, as I'll mention here in the next section, some great ways to integrate 365 logs and analytics with traditional systems, but out of the box, there's a lot of reporting capability. So it's critical to look at how your users are adhering to your governance plan and look for ways to enhance it. Also, as you go through your deployment process and user onboarding, look for how your governance plan is working and see if you can perhaps, again, enable new features to make your end users be more self-reliant and be able to support themselves rather than constantly having to come back to IT. All right, so with that, I wanted to transition really quickly to security and some of the lessons that we've learned, because security is a critical part of an overall governance plan. And so we have some recommendations around a starting point as you rolled out, or if you have recently rolled out Microsoft Teams, to make sure that you looked at and addressed some critical security components to ensure that you can maintain either your internal or industry or government compliance. And so to get started, right, as I mentioned, identity is critical. And so now we're transitioning to some recommendations to make sure that you secure identity and remote access into Microsoft Teams and really into Microsoft 365. And so one of our recommendations is make sure that you're looking at multi-factor authentication and you roll it out. As soon as you start rolling out the tools, you should definitely enable IT administrators for multi-factor authentication and enforce that. Also, interestingly enough, the industry overall, the security industry certainly, and even NIST for government has updated their recommendation for organizations going towards passwordless authentication. So if you start looking at multi-factor authentication and deploying it, not just for your IT administrators, but for your end users, you'll be ahead of the curve. However, we understand that, not everyone's ready to just chuck passwords out the window. And so enabling self-service password reset is very important to your success. This enables both administrators and users to be, again, more able to support themselves, and it's a self-service capability around just resetting passwords. Now, the interesting here is, as we get into some of the advanced protection of your environment, knowing that your users can self-reset their password, you can create policies where when Microsoft 365 is sure that an account has been compromised, you can actually lock the users out and force them to go through a self-service password reset and use multi-factor authentication to ensure that when they reset their password, they are in fact the person that they claim to be. So this is where things get a little bit interesting. Enabling conditional access policies is a very powerful tool within Azure AD. And really, this is where we're taking the very basic, identity, a username, and a password, which is kind of what a lot of the traditional environments relied on for users to identify themselves, and combine it with the device that they're using and the location that they're signing in from. So conditional access policies and have some advanced AI and other capabilities built in the background by Microsoft that allows you to be alerted when John logs in at 9 a.m. to start doing work, and suspiciously by 9:30 or 10 they're in China also trying to log in. So again, if you deployed multi-factor authentication, self-service password reset, you can take some automated reaction to that login attempt or even a successful login and lock John out in my example, and then force them to go through an authentication process to reset their password and ensure that the hacker is not able to get past just having accessed their account once, perhaps. And then finally, as you deploy multi-factor authentication and some of these other capabilities across all your accounts, it's critical and it's recommended that you set and create a break glass account. And what we mean is have one global admin within your tenant, an account, not a person, that's there just in case you're being attacked and all of your accounts are compromised. All of your regular administrative accounts are compromised. This could be an account that you set aside, set a really strong password for. You don't enable conditional access policies so that this account cannot be locked out. And again, someone can get back into the environment, reset accounts, and get control of it. All right, so it shouldn't surprise you that as part of implementing security, data management is going to be a core component of it. So the way that you deploy security around data management, again, is really looking at initially detecting the type of data. Traditionally, this was very much based on users recognizing data that needed to be secured. However, thanks to some of the tools that Microsoft has implemented and rolled out even recently, there's some automated labeling that's being introduced, not just in email, but also across Microsoft Teams and SharePoint Online, which is a very powerful capability. And so initially you want to detect the compliant data wherever it is within 365 or even potentially outside of 365. Apply some data protection, data loss prevention policies around it and classification capabilities. And this is again that guardrail to allow users to, even when they're not paying attention, to recognize that they have compliance data that they're putting into an email or into a document, into a team for sharing. Obviously, apply protection policies. So using tools like Azure Information Protection, you can encrypt those files. You can put visual indicators on the file in the header or footer to notify the user and remind them that this document may have some critical compliance information. And again, monitoring is a critical component of this. Track how users are accessing data, what they're doing with it, and potentially if data does leave the organization. Finally, there's a tool called Secure Score that Microsoft has had within 365. And, a lot of people look at it at one time or another, but it's actually a really great proactive tool that you can check regularly, on a weekly or monthly basis and use as a guidance for becoming a more secure organization. And so what it allows you to do is define kind of your goal score, right, based on the features that Microsoft recommends, best practices, as well as what you want to implement to be compliant, and then track through a very simple score that Microsoft gives you of where you are and where you're headed. Another capability that I think is very powerful here is Microsoft tracks industry averages and corporations that are similar sizes of what their security score averages, and so you can actually compare yourself to see where you stand. Are you behind the curve? You're kind of meeting the de facto minimum, or are you ahead? So it's a great tool, not just for you to track where you are, but also as a reporting tool up to management. And then finally, again, I got to harp on this, just regular audits, right? Logs, reporting, and keeping yourself as an organization and your users accountable to following security standards, compliance standards, and of course the governance plan. And so one of the things that we recommend for our customers is to turn on Microsoft Audit Log for Microsoft 365. And this is off by default, but it just enables a lot more information to be stored and retained temporarily within Microsoft and within 365. And then you can actually use some integration points to send that information to a SIEM tool or back to your on-prem log analytics tool. Also, create standards for going to the Security and Compliance Center, especially the governance reports and security reports. And again, look at reports regularly at a weekly, bi-weekly, and monthly time frame so that you can hopefully catch any sort of issues, whether it's a user that just needs additional training to make sure that they're keeping the organization secure, or identify any sort of issue that may have happened, as well as just regular guest access and things like that, right, to support your identity lifecycle. Don't forget to log into Azure Active Directory, which is actually part of the Azure portal and not your Office 365 tenant portal. And so again, there are a lot of great access review reports, as well as search capabilities to look at how and when guests are accessing, which could be part of the process and governance around disabling certain guest access if, for example, they haven't logged into an environment for 30 days or 60 days or something like that. And then look at proactive cloud security tools such as a CASB tool, and Microsoft offers something called Cloud App Security for advanced analytics. So this can look at your end user's identity, access, as well as just look for shadow IT, right? What are other components that your users are using? Let's make sure that your teams and collaboration use cases address those requirements, and then after that you can help your users retire those components or even just block them. So in wrapping up, we have another poll. So Diane, if you want to take over and share it with our listeners.
Sure. So our next poll is, how important are Microsoft security and compliance tools to your organization? Specifically the ones that Dave just referred to in his presentation. we'll give it a few seconds here for everyone to respond. And while you're responding, quick reminder, if you have any questions you'd like Dave or Joe to answer at the end of the presentation, please feel free to submit them in the questions pane. Okay. Looks like almost everyone's answered. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And it looks like, as we would expect, security and compliance is the tools are definitely important to your organization. Dave, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We really appreciate everybody, answering our polls and giving some relevant information today. And of course, thank you so much for joining. There's a few key takeaways that I just wanted to review, both for governance and security. So for team governance, start with implementing governance as soon as you can. Implement strong identity and data governance, right? And use 365 groups to apply consistent governance and ultimately, make sure that you create some process and governance around monitoring and reporting. So that's the process that you can then use to improve and update your standards and processes. And then around team security, start with identity, ensure that you're using some of the capabilities built into Azure Active Directory and Microsoft 365, as well as Teams, to ensure that you're enforcing your, identity lifecycle that you built within your governance plan. Next, ensure that you look at data protection using the new unified labels that were rolled out last year, the new capabilities within DLP and Azure Information Protection. And look at your secure score regularly. It really can be very helpful for you to track and report up to management to show the processes and the improvements that you're making to keep the organization compliant. Finally, again, speaking of reporting, it's super critical. Really, it's the way that you track your progress and you enable your users by looking for opportunities to provide training or additional training and protect them in addition to the organization to ensure your compliance. So again, thank you so much. I think at this point we're getting close to the end, but we wanted to take some time around any questions. So Diane, you've been collecting those.
I sure have. So the first one is, how does external access or federation work? So how's that different to guest access when it comes to Teams?
Sure. Yeah, let me jump in and take that. So Microsoft has two kind of systems for allowing external users to collaborate, within Teams and really within Microsoft 365. One is the federation system, and it allows you to federate with other organizations and invite users into conference calls or to work with you directly on a very specific, let's say, application that you might share out through, let's say, OneDrive. At the same time, you got guest access, and we call that like an invited role, where you essentially create an Azure Active Directory object on behalf of that guest user, and they get a permanent access into Microsoft Teams environment or potentially into other components of Office 365 or Microsoft 365 rather. And so they can log in and collaborate with the rest of the team with some ability to obviously put guardrails and security capabilities around what all they can do within that team. Things like, enable them or not allow them to create a channel or modify and delete information.
Okay. That makes sense. Another question. So let's see. So what's your opinion about enabling external sharing in SharePoint?
Sure. So from our perspective, we tell our customers that Teams is the hub for teamwork, as I said earlier, collaboration, and so a lot more of your, I think, proactive kind of again collaboration, guest access will need to stay or should stay within Microsoft Team, whereas SharePoint, when you just do SharePoint directly, should be used for information dissemination. I believe we have some webinars around, kind of recommended capabilities around that we have from previously, but you can certainly use that to share your parts of your intranet, let's say, as you look to disseminate information to partners. But again, it's a very different, usually read-only style guest access that you would provide to partners, let's say, or contractors that you're using for guest access, as opposed to collaboration.
Great. So last question. I think this is pretty common. Can I restrict access to a specific channel in Teams?
Yeah, so Microsoft has told us that was a very popular request, as early back as almost immediately when Team was released. And so they have been working diligently. Selectively, they have rolled out something called private channels, and it's not fully rolled out. But for currently in the tab area of Microsoft Teams, you can create some private channels and therefore manage who can then have access to that. You can also control that for guests. So again, going back to those questions around guest access, you can limit guest access or what they can do in specific channels. And the good news is Microsoft will be rolling out new capabilities here at the end of the year, applying some of those capabilities to control who has access to what on a channel by channel basis. So definitely there's more coming. Keep your eyes on some of the things that Microsoft is announcing as we speak at Ignite. And then certainly, we'll be doing updates around some of these capabilities in upcoming webinars as Microsoft is releasing them.
Excellent. So that's the end of our questions. Thanks, everyone.